Okay, great. So many of you may remember that last month at our June renters meeting, we talked about the City of Somerville budget. And when we say the City of Somerville, that means the mayor and the city council. So they just completed the city's annual budget process for the 2023 fiscal year, or the financial year for the city, which is different from the standard January to December calendar year. The city's fiscal year technically started on July 1st of this month and lasts until next June. And in our June renters meeting, our neighbor Mark from the Renters Committee did a really fantastic presentation talking about the city budget. So in case you weren't there, I first want to start with a few highlights. So the first highlight is a budget. So a budget is a document with predicted income and spending for a fiscal year. So basically this means it's a moral document that as well that reflects our values as a community. And when the city allocates funding to different departments and services and programs, this demonstrates where our city elected leaders prioritize and value for our residents. Here in Somerville, our city's budget is around $309 million. And the majority of the budget, around 70%, comes from tax collection, both private property tax as well as commercial tax. And the remainder is then made up mostly from state funding. So as you can see here on this slide, about 30% of Somerville city budget goes to funding education in our public schools. And this budget year, there was a 10% increase that's never happened before. Brand new, like tens of millions of more dollars going into our public schools. So that's great. And 15% of the budget goes to public safety, which includes the Somerville Police Department, the Fire Department, and emergency services. And the rest includes a mix of human services and administrative operations, basically all the things that keeps our city of 80,000 people running. So in Mark's conversation with us, his presentation with us, he also explained how the budget was created this year. So this year, our city council, which is made up of 11 members, they actually began discussing their priorities and what they felt would be most important to fund in the budget in April. And then our mayor, Katiana Ballantyne, she submitted her budget to the whole council in June. And then throughout the month of June, the City Council Finance Committee held several hearings or public meetings to debate and discuss, okay, why is there going to be this much money in this program? Or what is the funding in this program going to do? But ultimately, our city council only has the power to make cuts to the mayor's budget proposal, and then they vote yes or no on the final document. So the last highlight from last month's renters meeting is that we had Ward 3 City Councilor Ben Ewenkampen join us as a guest. And he shared that the budget is extremely important for all residents to pay attention to, even if you're not a voter or even if you just moved here, because everything that the city does costs money. And what Ben reminded us is that we as residents and organizers and activists should approach the mayor and councilors with our top priorities. And that is the most effective advocacy strategy. The last thing that Ben explained is that even though the budget process is technically finished for the 2023 fiscal year, there's also something what's called mid-year appropriations in a few months. And basically that just means the city, when they get more money in from the federal government and tax collection, will be able to put new amounts of funding towards the programs and services that we care about. So if we are not satisfied or happy with the current budget, we can and should keep raising our voices. So that is a summary of last month. Now, this month, we wanted to tell you all about what's happened since the end of June with the budget. So like I just said, City Council has the power to make cuts in the budget. And after many hours of debate, the council decided to cut more than $670,000 worth of funding from the budget. And those cuts primarily came from two programs or two sources. First, the Somerville Police Department, and second, a new office that the mayor proposed called Accountability, Transparency, and Access. So let me just give you some background. It might be helpful for everyone to know that since spring of 2020, after the murder of George Floyd, who was a Black man in Minnesota who was murdered by police in his community, there has been a grassroots activist movement across the United States, as well as here in Somerville, to quote, defund the police. So I understand that this phrase and this slogan may bring up many thoughts and emotions for people. And what I just want to focus us in on, at least in the Somerville movement, what residents are advocating for, however, is the shifting of funding. So that rather than investing more in police training maybe, and more in like technology, like putting that millions of dollars in funding into more human services and resources and programs that support our health and safety and address some of the root causes of violence in our communities. Some examples include funding for housing, food security, social workers, mental health care, and even things like free bathrooms in our neighborhoods. So back to the budget process, right? Our city council voted to remove about $400,000 from the Somerville Police Department for more body cameras and positions. And then they also cut the $200,000 for that new accountability office. The councilors argued that capacity already existed in the Somerville Police Department, and they didn't need the additional technology or positions, and that City Hall already had the resources for transparency. So this left the $670,000 extra from the budget. And then the mayor has a decision to then take that money and reinvest it somewhere else in the budget. So hopefully everyone's following me. I know this is kind of a complicated process. So the last thing though that happened after City Council made these cuts, the mayor, Mayor Valentine, decided to only reinvest about $200,000 of that funding back into the budget. So she decided to fund more SNAP benefits or food stamp funds for the Somerville farmers markets. She also decided to reinvest that money into a Braille printer for the city, which helps people who are blind or hard of sight, as well as a new position in the clerk's office. But the remaining $470,000 was not reinvested. So that money has been removed from the budget, and that's pretty much it. So we at CAAS we're feeling kind of disappointed that more of that $400,000 or $500,000 wasn't reinvested elsewhere in the city budget. We were expecting and advocating for greater investment in the Affordable Housing Fund, the new fund that is supposed to help prevent displacement, or more community organizers, or maybe things like free transportation or a mental health crisis team, or some of the many other ideas we know you and your counselors have. But we wanted to give you an update at this point so that you all know where the budget in the city of Somerville has landed. But the most important takeaway is that our advocacy and organizing doesn't have to end here. And if anyone at the meeting is feeling passionate and emotional, right, that the city can and should be doing more with that spare budget money and the millions more in revenue that we're going to get this fall from the federal government and tax collection, we can still advocate for resources. So I don't want to take too much time here, but I encourage, if anyone has any questions, or if you're interested in wanting to learn more about how you can raise your voice and be part of this advocacy process, please feel free to put a comment or question in the chat, and we definitely will make sure to come back to it. So thank you all so much for listening to my budget update. And now I want to pass it to Sam from the CAAS team to talk about a new tenant protection in Somerville.
Thanks, Nicole. Hi, everybody. I'm Sam. I'm also a CAAS community organizer. I use she, her pronouns. And yeah, you know, the topic of tonight's meeting is what is Somerville doing and what is Somerville not doing to support affordable housing and prevent displacement, right? So as a reminder, at last month's meeting, we made sure everyone was aware that the Somerville eviction moratorium was coming to an end at the end of June. So now it's official. It's July 12th. The Somerville moratorium is over. It's done. And this is another reason why, you know, we at CAAS were kind of frustrated that all of that money that Nicole just talked about was not reinvested into human services, especially housing. And in case you don't, actually, could you go to the next slide? Thanks. So if you're new here and you don't already know, landlords, even though the moratorium is done, landlords still have to follow a legal process to evict tenants. You don't have to move out just because your landlord says you do. I know people talked about that in the storytelling section. Many people don't know that. But actually, can you go to the next slide? It's only a judge can decide that you have to move out. So a landlord would have to take you to court, and then they would have to win the case. We can talk more about that another time if you want. But basically, during, you know, when the moratorium was active, landlords were still allowed to file evictions in court. But because of the high risk of contracting COVID-19 in a homeless shelter or from staying with friends temporarily, during the moratorium, even if a landlord won that eviction case in court, renters still could not be forced to leave their homes. So that was the additional protection. And could you stop sharing the slides for a second, Nicole? And so, thanks. Now that the moratorium is over, anyone who had lost the eviction case that their landlord brought to court could now be removed from their home and at risk of homelessness. And many service providers in Somerville, like CAAS, were concerned that since the moratorium's done, more landlords are going to be trying to evict their tenants. And, you know, it's really clear we're still living in a global pandemic. The risk of death is significantly lower in people who are vaccinated, but we all know people are still getting sick. COVID is still coming in waves, and a lot of us are still suffering the economic consequences from the pandemic. And so, you know, that's just to say, now that we can all be evicted again, shouldn't the city be investing more money in supporting renters who are struggling? We think so. And again, this is something that we can advocate for in the fall. So let's talk about that later if you're interested. And something, shifting gears, something that our city government has done recently to help renters avoid eviction was to basically expand a local law, also known as an ordinance, that was created in 2019. And could you pull up that slide, Nicole? So this local law in Somerville is called the Housing Stability Notification Act. And so since 2019, if a landlord in Somerville is beginning the eviction process, they have been required to give their tenants, regardless of immigration status, information about their rights and the resources that are available to help them. Can you go to the next slide? Thanks. So it's a 5-page document. These are a picture of the first 2 pages in English. This and also the Spanish, Portuguese, Haitian Creole, and Nepali versions are all available online. We can send you the link, or someone can put it in the chat. So that's already been required, and a landlord must deliver that by hand or by certified mail. Ignore that other slide right now. I'm about to jump to that. So now, starting tomorrow actually, that the Housing Stability Notification Act will require landlords to do more. You can click to the next slide. So now, whenever a landlord gets a new tenant, right, they have to give them this information about renter rights and resources that are available for help. So that's a pretty big deal, and that's thanks in large part to the at-large counselor Willie Burnley Jr., who pushed that. So this document is, oops, we can see you scrolling through the agenda, Nicole. This document is 6 pages long. These are just the first 2 pages in English. Again, you have Spanish, Portuguese, Nepali, Haitian Creole, and also Chinese, simplified and traditional online. Same link. And the landlord must give these documents to any new tenants in the language that they speak. Assuming it's one of these languages, which are the most widely spoken in Somerville, but we can talk about that later. But they have to give this to new tenants by the 5th day of the person's tenancy. So if you move in September 1st, they have to give it to you by September 5th. Again, they have to give it to you in hand or via certified mail, and also send it to you by email if you have an email address. And if you do not receive that document when you move into a new apartment, or the documents for when you're facing an eviction, you can report that. Can you go to the next slide, please? So you can report it to the Inspectional Services Department. If you're in Somerville, you just dial 311. The message is in English, but just wait. Someone will answer in whatever language you speak. They'll connect you to an interpreter. So you can access many city services with that number, by the way. But if you want to report a landlord for not giving you or someone else these documents, call this number, and the first complaint, the landlord will get a warning. The second complaint and any additional complaints, they have to pay $300. So it's something. And you can stop sharing slides, Nicole. Basically, you know, we're hopeful that this is one way to inform Somerville renters of their rights and the resources available. Obviously, it's not perfect, but it's something we wanted to make sure you knew about. So it would be great if we could all kind of discuss the information that me and Nicole just shared. And since it's 8 o'clock, let's do that in the breakout rooms. So if you haven't been here before, at this time during the meeting, we are going to send you into breakout rooms with smaller groups, with people who speak your language, so that we can just have more space to share, get to know each other, make connections, and yeah. So looking forward to seeing you in the breakout rooms. Please stay on Zoom, and we'll end the meeting from the breakout room. So this is the last time we'll be in the big group. All right? So thanks for your attention.
Okay, thank you, Sam, for explaining the new tenant protection here in Somerville, which we at CAAS are very excited about. And we are all going to be working very actively with each of you and our renters committee to get the word out about this, so that tenants know their rights much, much sooner here and can start advocating for them. So as Sam mentioned, we're going to go into breakout rooms. So Portuguese speakers are going to be with Fabiano. We are going to have one group of our Spanish speakers with Camila, a second group of our Spanish speakers with Sam and Marla, We are also going to split our English